I'm Patty Biafra. I'm the director of the Worker Ownership Initiative with Nexus Community Partners. My role, I work with startups, I work with transitions into employee ownership. I also manage, along with Benjamin, Christina, and Deanna, the local fund for worker ownership. Our panel today is on financing. It brings together local and national funders, wonderful, familiar faces, to talk about how to access capital for employee-owned businesses and for real estate investment cooperatives. We'll also discuss the role of philanthropy in growing the shared ownership ecosystem. I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves in a minute, but I want to point you to your workbooks. You have two. Well, you have more than two, but there's one that's the employee ownership workbook. If you look at page 35, you'll see some ecosystem work there. So if you want to follow along and start to map out the financing ecosystem. And there's a community ownership workbook. You can take a look at page 18. So our panelists today are Electra Stedletsky from MCCD, Evan Edwards from Project Equity, Aaron Heelan from Platform Minnesota, Mark Fick from Shared Capital, and Mark Sung from the McKnight Foundation. So if you all want to introduce yourselves, we'll start with Mark. Tell us about yourself, your organization, and what type of financing you focus on.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Fick. I am the Senior Loan Officer with Shared Capital Cooperative. Shared Capital Cooperative is a cooperatively owned loan fund based here in the Twin Cities, but we work nationally. We provide financing, primarily debt financing with some equity investments, to cooperatives of all types all across the United States. But we work exclusively with cooperatives. So it makes us a little bit unique in the world of financing. For myself, I've been with Shared Capital for about 9 years now. Prior to that, spent 10 years doing community development finance in Chicago, and have been working with cooperatives of various sorts for about 30 years, both in the regionally and nationally.
Is it afternoon yet? Anyway. How are you all? It's wonderful to see all these wonderful faces in the same room. I'm Electra Stedletsky. I'm the Director of Shared Ownership with the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, or MCCD. We are a consortium of 35 nonprofit affordable housing developers and economic development organizations and a CDFI that serve shared ownership enterprises statewide. And essentially, we also provide debt financing. We can also serve as an intermediary organization for grant support for shared ownership projects. But we provide technical assistance for businesses across the spectrum of ownership models, from micro-enterprise to shared ownership. Our shared ownership work focuses on cooperatives of all types, as well as real estate projects, so commercial, community, land trust, and real estate investment cooperatives. I've been in this role for about 2 years and came to this work from a background in nonprofits, philanthropy, government, and economic development. It's good to be with you.
Hi, everyone. Hello. I don't know if this is working. Hello? Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Heelan. I am with Platform Commercial Real Estate. But I'll say this, this work fits into like all the many hats that I wear. So like this is the Venn diagram of like Platform Commercial Real Estate, where we are B Corp commercial real estate brokerage and consulting firm. We mostly work with small businesses and nonprofits. And then I also work with the Eastside Funders Group, which is a funder collaborative on the east side of St. Paul, whose focus is on community ownership, community economic development initiatives, and revitalizing the East Side. And so in that space, I'm a grant maker. And in the platform space, I'm kind of a deal maker, like building the capital stack. And then I also work with Nexus and have for about 5 years on their shared ownership initiative. And in that way, I'm kind of doing program work and also doing feasibility work. So I come to this with, of course, many hats that you all already know about, and I am excited to be here today.
Thanks. Hi again, everyone. Evan Edwards, Project Equity. We came to become a capital provider by virtue of the fact that there is not enough capital, or traditionally was not enough capital to fund transitions to co-ops and EOTs and ESOPs. EOTs are employee ownership trusts. We have two capital projects we're involved in partnership with Shared Capital Cooperative. We are a part of the Accelerate Employee Ownership initiative, which is limited to making transactions in California, Arizona, and Nevada. And it's because of that limitation that we stood up a second capital vehicle called Catalyst Fund, which allows us to provide, again, mostly debt, but some equity financing for transactions across the country. It's a pretty flexible vehicle. And again, we came to become a provider mostly out of the need for more capital to come to this growing space.
Hi, everybody. Mark Sung, Senior Program Officer with the McKnight Foundation. And so the McKnight Foundation is a private family foundation. The part of the organization where I sit, something called the Vibrant and Equitable Communities Program. That's a new program that focuses on economic justice in the state of Minnesota. And the part of the portfolio that I hold is something called Building Community Wealth, or predominantly capital access. And through that work, we partner with a lot of grantee partners, MCCD, Rondo CLT, Nexus. I see Acer in the room, so I see a lot of partners in this space, and really happy to be here.
Wonderful. So I'll start with you, Mark, because you're holding the mic. What do you see as a funder? What are the benefits of investing in shared ownership? Why is that part of your work?
Yeah, so I think from prior slides, and I won't do justice to both the intelligent comments both Ben and Evan have showcased, which is the ways in which it can anchor and arrest gentrification in a lot of spaces, give community control to the community, which is really an important feat. And I think in a lot of ways, what we see in the market conditions today is ways that wealth gets extracted from a lot of different outside entities. And so the diversity and the richness of how communities have anchored their own sort of flavor and what they've desired in those spaces have slowly eroded. And recognizing that wealth exists outside of just financial means, it is the plurality and the vibrancy of the people and the needs and goods that they demand is part of that fabric. And so recognizing that it's more than just like having ducats in your bank, it's about being able to enjoy the spaces and be alive in the space that you are. So that is a component that I think too often we leave behind, that it's all an economic engine, but it's also a vibrancy engine. And as a part of that, McKnight recognizes both the opportunities and challenges in how do we anchor that work. That's why we work so heavily with a lot of intermediaries. They're smarter, they're on the ground, that identify trends that we will not be able to see. And I think it's part of that is how do we engage in a dialogue of making sure that we continue to follow. We are blessed with such forward-thinking partners like Nexus, like MCCD, like Acer and Rondo CLT, that it requires us to think about what is a better way to do this and what is philanthropy but the love of humanity. And to do that, we have to do with our partners.
Thank you. So, we have some specialized funders here. How, and this is primarily for Evan and Mark Fick, how does investing in shared ownership differ from traditional funds? What are some of the challenges there, and how do you come to the table?
Maybe I'll start and then pass the mic. For one, when you're investing in an entity that will be worker-owned, there isn't one business owner that you are, attaching in order to finance the deal. And one of the challenges that we have in this space in terms of attracting capital is that, traditional lenders like to have one person that they can attach for a personal guarantee. And the case of employee-owned entities, we're speaking of a group that, largely are undercapitalized, right? They're not going to be able to finance a deal, and they don't have necessarily have the assets to attach. So that's one of the challenges that makes our work pretty unique. I think it's also that we have a particular lens that we want to lift up people, right? And so we have to have probably a little bit different underwriting criteria in mind than maybe a traditional lender does that makes us unique for the space, because if you want to lift people up, sometimes you have to look at absorbing risk, or you have to look at, and I should put risk in quotes, because, it turns out that worker-owned businesses aren't risky, right? These are like entities that people take a lot of pride in operating well. But per traditional underwriting criteria, we have to look at them a little bit differently and take some creativity. And I'll sort of leave it at that and let Mark expand.
Yeah, at Shared Capital, when we are looking at a loan request or a request for an investment into a cooperative, there are sort of two different lenses that we might use, generally speaking. One is to do the traditional business underwriting. We have to understand the cash flow and the market and the capacity of the leadership and the ability for folks to run this business in a productive way. But there is, when we're looking at shared ownership, there's a whole other side of underwriting and understanding the assessment of an investment by looking at the people, as was already referenced to, and understanding the democracy of what's being created, and digging into the relationships between the people in the organization, and the capacity of the members not just to do the day-to-day work, but to make decisions together in a productive way, and deal with conflict in a productive way, and manage the people side of the organization differently than other forms of business ownership. And so we dig deeply into both sides of those pools. And along the way, we have to also make sure that we are not, as was referenced with kind of personal guarantees and things like that, elements that are a part of standard business underwriting and the rest of the economy that are often exploitive and actually sort of exclude people from opportunities. And so we want to make sure that when we're structuring an investment into a cooperative, we're doing that in a relational way that is actually supporting those members to build their business and be successful along the way.
Thank you. It's just one mic. Okay, so this is an Aaron Electra question, and others can feel free to jump in, but how is real estate investment different from worker co-ops, and what are some of the challenges? And you can feel free to answer what are some of the challenges, or what is it that you're looking for when you're looking at investing in real estate?
So when I think about the difference between the process for the transition for a worker co-op, and then the process of a community-owned group coming together to buy real estate, one of the biggest factors I see is time. Like, these deals come up, things go on the real estate market, and it moves so fast. And so we have to be ready. The worker cooperative, as you've heard, it can take a couple years to do it really well, and sellers come to this work and come to Nexus and come to MCCD and other co-op developers, and they want to sell to their employees. And then on the real estate side, a community will see a building come on the market, and if it's a good deal, we have to make an offer and move really quickly. And so in that time, in that 60 days of due diligence, if we're lucky enough to be chosen to be the group that buys the real estate, we have a lot to do to understand the feasibility of the real estate and also the feasibility of the co-op. And so there's a lot of work that needs to happen. On page 9, you'll see this cute little Venn diagram that we created about real estate project feasibility, but also the co-op business feasibility, and then a whole lot of determination. Because in these real estate it's really obvious in the worker cooperatives, like you're workers, you're coming together to own a business. But in a real estate cooperative, you're business owners, you're not volunteers, you're coming together to also start a business. And so there's a ton of sweat equity that goes into that, and owner time. And so it all has to come together under this pressure of like 60 to 120 days, or you can't get the deal done.
Yeah, I'd add that it's really important to understand what your lender needs in order to understand kind of all aspects of the deal, and also to plan to have to find and secure some of those contingencies that make the deal a little bit stronger. And different types of real estate assets might require different things. And not all lenders loaned the same type of commercial transaction or real estate transaction. So it's also about, spending time exploring who the appropriate fit lender is for your project.
Okay, how do you see the role of government policy in facilitating or hindering financing for shared ownership? And can you give an example of a partnership that has helped catalyze shared ownership? Electra, you can start, and others can also answer.
Well, you're very fortunate to be leaving this fabulous gathering with this excellent resource that will tell you a lot more about this work. But as an organization, MCCD's work touches small business development, capital access and lending, policy and advocacy, and leadership and field building. And it is not particularly common for a CDFI to have in-house lobbyists. But we've utilized that capacity in our organization to advocate on behalf of the community development sector writ large. And as you all know, it's not surprising that a key component of systems change are the legislative remedies that can help unlock some doors that have historically been closed, or maybe there wasn't even a door that existed. So in the work that we do, we're operating at the federal level, the state level, and the local level to make sure that we're in conversation and in regular dialogue with the people that kind of are sitting in the policy-making seats, but also their teams, right? The folks that are briefing elected officials, and the folks that are in the roles to become the champions of shared ownership. So as a longtime lending partner and friend to the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, we invested quite a lot of time and energy in educating those professionals to help them really understand why some of their programs were prohibitive for certain types of legal businesses. And in that work, we engaged with ecosystem stakeholders, many of the friends in this room, so thank you for your participation in this, to really understand what DEED could do to help strengthen the enabling environment for shared ownership enterprises of a wide range of types. And that resulted in the Community Wealth Building Program that is in its pilot phase right now, that has created a $3 million loan fund for worker and other cooperative types, real estate investment cooperatives, and commercial community land trusts. And what was critical in those conversations was helping DEED understand some of the things that have already been mentioned in this panel, that the cost of capital matters to borrowers, but it also matters to lenders, right? So like the stipulations that come with how intermediaries and CDFIs are able to bring community resources and financing is important. So the interest rates for this product are capped at 4%. The other thing that is unusual for DEED, but common for shared ownership financing, is that there is no requirement for personal guarantees. And that took some negotiation, right? Some bringing folks along. But it was kind of a critical part of the work that we're doing, and in many ways, a large part of a multi-pronged kind of strategy for our advocacy work to help support the field, right? Is that if we want to see shared ownership enterprises really become normalized so that the barriers that have traditionally kept communities from coming together in order to bring to life what they want to see in their communities or protect what they have in communities from threats of speculation, gentrification, et cetera, we need to make these channels open, accessible, and make shared ownership enterprises explicitly eligible uses for these programs. But by also having conversations with government agencies about these kind of prohibitive criteria, we hope to encourage our friends at DEED to eliminate those criteria in their other underwriting requirements for their other programs. And one of the other things that policy advocacy was able to do was to embed shared ownership as an explicitly eligible use for the federal state small business credit initiative program. So there are a number of different ways that you can be having conversations with community leaders, government officials, their staffs, departmental staffs, to really open the door for them to be thinking about these things and to really take seriously some of these fantastic recommendations that are there. But one of the things that I will say is that CDFIs and the folks in this room are such a key part of the enabling environment and the ecosystem for small business development. And what is important is that we all see policy and advocacy as a core function of how we're going to advance not only just racial equity and economic justice, but systems change as a whole.
I see government policy impacting employee ownership in a number of ways, but I'm going to highlight three specifically. One is at the awareness level, right? Government has the megaphone, the bully pulpit, that they can raise awareness of the value proposition of something like shared ownership in a way that just about no other vehicle can, right? In California, Project Equity in partnership with the Work Coalition was able to pass the first state bill. I forget the number of the state bill offhand, but it passed a state bill that created the first Office of Employee Ownership in the state of California. And what this essentially does is this works at the awareness level such that now there is that entity within government that's giving the good housekeeping seal of approval to employee ownership and can help us to raise awareness. The next level that government can be helpful is at the incentive level. In other words, incentivizing business owners to want to transition to employee-owned companies, whether through their succession plan or because they see it as a productivity strategy. And that can be achieved in part through the tax code. And that was lifted up in earlier comments with respect to how it is that Section 1042 at the federal level provides a tax incentive for business owners, right? That provides the incentive from the government level to actually create an employee-owned company. So we've done awareness, we've done incentive to do it, and now at the operational level, and another item that was lifted up is preferential treatment or the ability for employee-owned businesses to be able to retain their status if they're a minority or woman-owned business, or otherwise have a preferential treatment, right, that comes from being employee-owned. And an example of that is, excuse me, in Los Angeles County, Project Equity in partnership with the county has passed a local ordinance that would allow for employee-owned companies to receive certain preferential treatment in bidding. The point being that government has reach and can be impactful in a number of different ways, but at the level of awareness, so there's more knowledge of employee-owned business and their value proposition. At the level of pipeline, creating more opportunity, incentivizing, and then at the level of helping them succeed operationally is where government can have three very important roles in creating employee-owned businesses.
So you're holding the mic. If you want to pass that over to Mark, what is needed to bring more funders to the table? And we have different types of funders here. So think about your type. What do you need to bring them?
What do you mean, my type? All right.
What do we need to bring more capital?
Yeah, this space of employee or collective ownership or shared ownership just cuts in so many different ways. And philanthropy, being newer into the space, is that it doesn't operate like a lot of other industries because we have a different positionality in this space. And it can be a little bit opaque in how different funders identify how they believe they'll contribute in the changing of the world. So with that caveat, I say part of it is it's incumbent upon folks like me who identify different organizations that are in the philanthropic space that are curious about what shared ownership means and introduce it in ways that are acceptable. And by that, because when we think of co-ops, I think the initial thrust of most things that emerge in people's minds are the food co-ops or RAI buying co-ops for the most part. And then you can expand into electrical utilities. But then there's just this entire continuum of ownership that requires different degrees of participation, engagement. 40-person minimum for ESOPs would be a good entry. And so there's just a whole world of opportunities, which is also a very good thing because it allows that entry for the philanthropy to identify a space that's appropriate for them. But I think part of it is continuing to message how in all the ways the activation of shared ownership can elevate communities. And we could do that by layering it on in a lot of different spaces. And even this microcosm of St. Paul and Minneapolis, we see the emergence of all these spaces happening, and what does that mean collectively to create impact? So demonstrations such as this is very impactful. I see a dude from Living Cities over there, and I think champions like that can sort of continue to expand the reach of the concept and its multitudes is a better way to convince philanthropy, because I think you can talk about ownership and all these things, but until you see it manifesting with this cumulative effect, it's really hard to grok. So I think that is the best way. And then through that point, you can say, here are grants that are helpful, here are PRIs that are helpful, here are other credit enhancements. And I think also to Evan's point and Electra's point, government helps enable that environment where the SBA looks at guarantees. They're continuing to have this conversation, but until we say, here's a very easy pathway for y'all to enter into this space, it becomes too much of an exercise because the demand is high everywhere. And so the easier that the solution becomes apparent, then I think philanthropy is easier to step into that space.
I'll just mention, for the last couple years, a place we've seen philanthropy step up on the real estate side and government too with the local fund is on the due diligence pre-development piece. And I think this is really important because if you think of this, Leslie will talk about this hopefully with NEIC, they did this all on their own 10 years ago, 15 years ago before philanthropy was stepping into this. But you're getting a group of, some of these co-ops, you're getting a group of neighbors, business owners together to buy a piece of real estate. So to do that right and to make a good investment, you need good pre-development, you need good due diligence, you need to make sure that soil is not contaminated. There's a lot of cash that go, and you need technical assistance because you need somebody to do the math, right? And so all this work goes in, and sometimes you can find out you should absolutely not buy that real estate. That is a terrible investment. And it's really hard to say, hey, 15 neighbors, you've all put in, $3,000 or $4,000, and we just spent all that money down on due diligence, and now we're done. And so that is really unique with the money. Lisk has some money, and I tried to do a brain dump in here of all the sources I know, and I'm sure you have sources that you can share with me too. But the Nexus money, the Nexus money through the local fund can pay for this due diligence and technical assistance. There's money through LISC, which has been super helpful for me on a bunch of deals. Eastside Funders Group has a pre-development fund, and I'm sure there's other out there. But I think funders need to know, like, sometimes the answer is going to be like, oh, we spent all this pre-development money and they are not moving forward with the project, and that's the best answer, right? Like, that is the best deal. And I just want to say, on the back end of this, philanthropy should also be, and maybe other funders, should be thinking about asset management. Like, we're investing all, this is kind of new, like investing in real estate for philanthropy. And for the government, and like how in 10 years from now, we just do not want an environment where people are losing these buildings and we're like, oops, they screwed up. Like, how are we continuing to make sure people have good asset management plans and a good plan for the future?
Just a few things on that, maybe, and I will avoid my more radical personal opinions. I'll try to avoid those in the span. But there's a few things, when we think about, like, how do we get more money into the space? How do we get more money there? I think there's a couple of things to consider that are very important. One is that the money that is out there, the well-established, larger regulated banking institutions, the venture capital funds, the kinds of money that is out there that is looking to make money off of their money isn't necessarily the kind of money we want in this economy that we're creating. And so there is an element of we have to make our own money and we have to use our own money to build a different kind of economy. I do not have any hopes that the large established banks are going to suddenly discover this as a great model for themselves and spend a lot of time in this space. And I think there are debates in our field about how we should pursue that or not. And I think there are legitimate arguments on both sides. The place where I look, and part of the reason that I come to that is because when I look at the origins of Shared Capital Cooperative, 45 years ago in Minnesota and Wisconsin, there were cooperatives that couldn't get banks to lend them money. And they said, you know what, we got to do it ourselves. And they started investing in each other. And we grew and grew, and now we are a well-established CDFI lending fund that works nationally in providing co-op money to other co-ops. And that wouldn't have happened if we had started out with a bank investment necessarily, or a traditional foundation investment of some sort that says, go do this, but be like the other lenders out there. And so I agree that we need to grow, we need to find more money, but I bristle a little bit at we need to get the big banks money, we need to get the venture VC money, we need to get that kind of money into this world because there's a lot of cleaning up that would have to happen to use that money appropriately. And the world that we work in as a CDFI is another maybe an example of that. CDFIs can be incredible institutions, and CDFIs have changed how community development works in the United States over the last several decades. And we are a CDFI, and we work in that world. But until just a few years ago, most of the CDFI world completely dismissed cooperatives. I would go to the small business gathering of the CDFIs 10, 12 years ago when it was first starting out, and would get just ignored and pushed out of the room when I brought up worker cooperative ownership as an important part of community development. And what happened is there's a handful of CDFIs around the country that started with a different kind of nature, groups like us and like LEAF and like Cooperative Fund of the Northeast and groups like this that from their core saw lending differently and acted differently. And we are seeing changes in the CDFI world. There are more CDFIs that are coming to this space and interested in and learning, and that is wonderful. But one of the reasons that CDFIs are hesitant to spend more time in this space is because it is large banks that run their boards and their loan committees. And if we have to shift the dynamics of what is a good loan, what is a good investment, what is a good group of people to be putting our money into. And until we do that, I don't think we can simply take whatever money comes our way.
Mark, that was wonderful. Thank you. That brings me to our last question, which I didn't prepare for anybody, so it's a curveball. But what trends do you see? What is the work ahead of us to bring more capital to make this part of the mainstream? And so anybody can take that on as you think about it.
Well, I would just offer that, more impact investors are interested in this space than ever before. To some of Mark's points, I'm not sure that they're coming to it with their hearts necessarily in the right places, but if we can get them in the tent, we can maybe turn a few of them around. But that is something that we see more of. There's a lot more impact capital coming to the space. I made the point earlier that part of the reason that Project Equity wanted to get into the capital space, first in partnership with Shared Capital, and then on our own in order to be able to make investments in some of the other regions where we were doing transitions, was because of the lack of capital. And now it's almost swung around where there was a point, last year where I felt like there was too much money chasing just a handful of deals, right? So, it's finding that sort of harmony between the pipeline and deal flow. But I think the fact that certain capital is finding this space, I think one of the key issues for us is, we have largely provided concessionary capital when it's come to PRI and impact. And I think when you have capital investors that are a little bit more return-centric, again, per Mark's comments about who's coming to the table, that makes it a little bit more challenging. So there's a lot of issues to be worked out, but I think we have raised the profile enough of employee ownership, seen its viability and shown that it's investment grade. I think that employee-owned companies probably fail at a far lower rate than other businesses. So, we have the case for that support now, and I think more investors are seeing it. I think it is incumbent upon us to make sure that the type of financing that we're seeing is amenable to the types of businesses we want to build.
I'll also add that, thank you. Having non-recourse dollars matters because, it's already been brought up a bit about the way that we're thinking about risk and how cooperatives are commonly thought of as inherently more risky deals. But in order to kind of help these models proliferate, it's really important that we combine a lot of what you've heard today, right? So we're both thinking about who's at the decision-making table, right? Underwriting these loans, describing what types of projects pass go and which ones do not. But it also is an invitation for us to reimagine who's risky. Why do we think they're risky? What are we going to do about that? Because the disparities and the injustices that we are still grappling with didn't come from nowhere. So it's important that folks that are providing capital that can be relent to these projects are really looking themselves in the mirrors and saying, are we making investments in possibility? Are we making investment in taking a radically different direction from where we've been? Are we making investments to repair the harm that has existed and continues to be perpetrated? So there's a lot of things that need to have some real talk kind of conversations when we're thinking about the types of capital that is coming the direction of shared ownership and what our ability to deploy that capital in a responsible manner means.
That's a good way to open it up, I think, to the audience. If folks have questions, we have a couple more minutes. Perfect timing. We have 15 minutes. But want to hear from you all, what you want to hear from these folks, what's coming up for you. I have a question. Thanks, Christina. I planted someone in the audience.
It's something you said, Evan, and all of you have touched on it, but I'm really curious about it. It's that tension between funding available and creating and finding deals. Do any of you have suggestions or ideas about
Well, I find that we cannot invest enough in one awareness, right? Like all of you in the room have learned probably a lot more about shared ownership than you came in learning. And there's a lot of, I'd call it, we would call them, we call them at Project Equity the employee ownership myths, right? My workforce isn't interested in owning the business. They wouldn't know how to run it, and they don't have enough money to be able to buy it. And so it never even becomes a matter of consideration, right? So, you know, that awareness for the, what we refer to as the pre-consideration business owner, and we speak about business owners a lot at Project Equity because we don't do startups. You know, we intentionally focus on businesses that are operating and cash flowing positively because we feel like that's a way that we can help workers build wealth pretty quickly, right? So we spend a lot of time trying to convince or trying to raise awareness among folks that either are business owners or business connectors, the folks that have regular touch with business owners like their CPA or their banker, that employee ownership, worker ownership is viable. So it's building that awareness, but it's also the piece that comes after awareness is what we refer to as activation. How is it that I actually can bring this forward to my client, to my business partner, to whoever it is in my circle? How is it that I can like make this real for them, right? And so forums like this are important. The ability literally to raise awareness, like to you know, we live in this country in a marketplace of ideas. And I dare say that no one knew what AI was 5 years ago. And now everyone has some inkling of it, positive or negative, right? It's really hard to get mind share in this country, is my point. And that's one of our big challenges is how do we get the mind share so that, you know, EO and AI are just as incumbent in people's heads, right? So it's an awareness thing, Christina, and finding creative ways to be able to build that awareness, but then the follow-on piece to that is the activation. Like someone can know about, you know, these models, but they might not know how to engage it. And so we're doing a lot of work on that. We can talk to you about it, but that's the challenge.
And I also want to shout out to Minnesota CEO, the Center for Employee Ownership, as a good activation in that awareness piece. Because you know this is an easy space for all of us. Like we wouldn't be in the room if we didn't have like some modicum of like interest. Like this works. So how do you go into those brave spaces where they're just going to look at you like you have no idea how hard it is to do all those things, and then you create pathways for opportunities and say it's doable. It's done. And those are where the government actors can come into play, the economic development organizations that help bring it in, especially in greater Minnesota, where brain drain is a concern, where their economic livelihoods might go away if that graying owner decides to vacate that space. And so there are different value propositions that also emerge that are different from the context of the opportunities.
I'll also share both a governmental example and a grassroots example. Here in Minnesota, the state had been spending 5 years looking at various types of initiatives to help interrupt both the care crisis and the workforce shortage crisis for direct care workers, who are largely women, immigrants, people of color. And one of the reasons that there is a workforce shortage crisis because direct care jobs tend to have chronically low wages, high turnover, right? It's stressful. There is low career kind of mobility, training opportunities, no benefits, et cetera. So like sounds like a really tough place to be, right? To take care of our elders and neighbors with disabilities. But in probably about 12, 13 years ago, the Cooperative Development Foundation partnered with the ICA Group, which is one of the oldest organizations promoting employee ownership, to create the National Home Care Initiative, which was a really intentional strategy to bring 25 worker-owned co-ops to the direct care sector by 2025. So they had been not only working with like local cooperative developers and direct support kind of organizations, but they also were publishing information about what they were doing, right? So like not only like resource guides for like, here's how you can start thinking about taking your expertise in the field and imagining yourself as a worker owner, but they were doing these kind of convenings and sharing this information around the country. And it found its way to Minnesota. So as Minnesota was trying to think of what are we going to do to solve our problem here, they came across that research. And some brave, creative soul said, let's try this. So when they were using their American Rescue Plan dollars to set up grant programs to help support the field and address this workforce shortage crisis, they created 4 programs. So one of them was like a retention bonus, one of them was a training stipend, and then one of them did another thing that I can't recall. But one of the last one did the employee ownership cooperative program. So we went from having 1 worker-owned cooperative in the direct care space to today we have 6. And that grant program created a channel for these folks that were already doing this work, already knew the field and the industry, to come together and have a boost, right? So they had some working capital funding, and surely that's not all the capital needs that they will have, but it got them started. And what was cool about that program was that it was just posted on the Department of Human Services website, right? We did some info sessions, there was some information available, we were talking to economic development partners, we were talking to wherever the direct care workers might be. So that's one way that like government can partner to help say like, not only let us help create the pipeline, but let's help resource it. Another cool thing that Minnesota can learn a bit from, and all of us can put our heads together to think about how we might do this, is I was having a conversation with some friends at the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. And they had created an innovative pilot program that they're tweaking ever so slightly the more that they learn about how this is working. But they're partnering with local community embedded organizations that might have a wide variety of functions. But the reason why that local embeddedness is super important is because when you're trying to start these collective ownership projects, trust is important, right? Who you know is important. And whether or not you want to do things with them is important. So if somebody that you know in community, you work with on a lot of things, says to you, have you ever thought of this? You might give it more thought, right? So we talked about business succession and transitions where, you know, you're talking to your accountants and other folks that are working with those business owners. But like, what about people that are experts in their field and their workers? So what CF&E did was they were partnering to train cohorts of developers that worked with these partner organizations that might be in a wide range of fields, right? To say, what if you could do co-op development with the people that you serve in the network that exists already? And when I heard that, I was just like, that is so cool. Say more. Keep me posted. We love that. You know, but I think lifting up those types of examples of innovation in the ecosystem is really important.
I'll just add a little bit more to Christina's question. That's where we started from the real estate side. So my background is in business district work. Like I work with small businesses. I'm a planner. I have a background in economic development. And I would say I graduated in 2010, and I would say since then, I've heard hundreds of people that want to own local, they want to own buildings with their neighbors, they want to take back and be able to control what's happening in their neighborhood. And so I don't think there's a shortage of people that want to do this. I hear from people all the time, and I'm sure all of you care about what is happening on the corner by your house and what goes there. And so the gap is that technical assistance piece, right? How do we do this? We want to do this. How do we do it? How do we do it and not waste or risk, our neighbors' money? And then, and so we have great providers. We have so many TA providers in the Twin Cities, and that's working really well. But then there's this other piece about capital, right? So when you finance a real estate deal, it's just math. It can work. It usually does work. but you have to have a down payment. And so I will say the city of Minneapolis has done this really well with the Ownership and Opportunity Fund. Like, that is life-changing because that comes in as equity for the deal for people trying to buy real estate. It's for folks that have traditionally not been able to buy real estate, and it really focuses on owner-occupied real estate. And so that's one thing that I want in St. Paul. But and St. Paul's doing a great job on the TA side with Nexus and on the pre-development side. So those two things, if we can bring that all together, I think that could really matter. And you know what Evan was saying earlier about small businesses, and this is the time where folks are selling. This is what we're seeing in commercial real estate too. We're seeing small businesses sell their building. They've had all their equity tied in this building. And this is like the next 5 years, 10 years will be what our communities look like.
Well, thank you. This was a fantastic panel, much better than what I dreamed of last night. Thank you, everybody. We are at time, and I see lunch has arrived. So if we could give everybody a round of applause. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and let's keep talking.